If we really think that politicians are going to be the solution to policing, we're heavily mistaken. And in fact, a lot of the work that Aaron has done looking at how police control the conversations when it comes to community policing, that's the same tactic that politicians use, right? That's a farce. That's how we mediate the relationship that we have to the people who actually have control and power. Politicians are never going to get the job done. They're not going to help us in the long run. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't look to them to mediate some of the problems that we have, but just noting that we're not going to get the change we seek by having conversations with politicians. I would also add, when we talk about disentangling race and class in the United States, we should be very clear about the sort of historical legacy of racism in the United States and how policing operates today to maintain that legacy. Because I would argue that it's actually quite clear to see how institutionalized racism has been a fundamental component of capitalism since its origins. Even starting with the fact that all of the labor that slaves produced is what funded the banks that led to the development of industrial capitalism in Britain, and then subsequently all of the slave labor in the United States is what fueled those factories in Britain and allowed capital to expand across the world. So you should just take that and keep that in mind. And subsequently, once we told plantation owners they could no longer spread slavery in the United States, we found other ways to expropriate black and brown bodies. Today what we do is we fund the United States government and we fund our capitalist system by locking up 2.5 million people into prisons and exploiting their labor. And that it's important to track that legacy and understand where that comes from. I'll stop there.
One of the things that I liked best about Alex's book is that most of the chapters have the structure where he looks at a particular area of policing, like immigration policing, drug policing, political policing, and sort of looks at the current state of it, explains how it developed the form that it has, and then there's a little section called reforms, which are sort of the current menu of proposals that are generally sort of bandied about in polite company. And then there's, he does a very good job of demolishing those and showing how limited they are and how they actually fail to address the problems that he's explained. Then there's a section called alternatives, where he lays out fundamentally an abolitionist argument that rather than looking at fixing this, we need to be looking at replacing it. Rather than looking at what the police could be doing instead, we need to be looking at what society could be doing instead of police. So far, so good.
I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. Yeah.
I worry that that if the only thing we have to say about police is no, that we miss opportunities to pursue reforms that could have the effect of not re-legitimizing them, reinscribing them in the community, broadening their power and their expertise, but instead have the effect of diminishing the institution as it stands and moving resources away from it. The question I think that poses is how, looking at the situation prospectively, we sort out which reforms fit the abolitionist agenda and which ones ultimately have the effect of reinvigorating, resuscitating the institution of policing.
And how we sort of start to think through this as a process, right? The houseless conversation, I think, is a good one, right? What are some of the other things that we can do as individuals? If this is going to move, we have to move at least in a similar direction, right? That is my belief, at least.
I'm the co-chair of Portland Jobs with Justice, and Portland Jobs with Justice is working all the time to just turn people out. I think that we're much better off giving our talents to a collective and then being able to turn out en masse. And because of the effect of groups like Don't Shoot Portland and Critical Resistance is that they've been resetting the bar in terms of just how far along the spectrum can you be to call yourself a progressive organization. And while Portland Jobs with Justice may not have engaged in something that was against the police, in the past, it's a new day because people in it are making some of the older people who maybe had misconceived ideas about the police being part of the working class have been doing a pretty good job of patiently explaining that that's not true, and that if Portland Jobs with Justice seeks to serve the communities that it sets out to, well, then it's going to mean that you have to be very honest about the fact that the police are going to be an impediment to anything that we're pushing forward, whether they're being explicit about how hostile they are to us or not. Because any worker anywhere that's fighting for a better wage, which is typically what Jobs with Justice is turning people out for, is going to be stopped by the police if the boss calls them. And that's like old news to a lot of people who are in this room, but to people who are just coming around to this stuff, who are just getting agitated, this is brand new, and it's something that has to be said and resaid so that people can see it with their own eyes. And even better, if you end up going to a protest or a march and you see the police beat somebody down just for trying to fight for what's right, that'll really shake your ass up. And I want to be able to make that more normal so that the example of what I was talking about earlier with Portland Jobs with Justice, which is a humble coalition but makes real moves, is able to now be in league with Care Not Cops and with Pop Mob, popular mobilization against the far right and the police in the far right. Now, all of the people, the hundreds of people that are in the network are getting these messages. And by having that be the air you breathe, I think has a very important effect on people. And I look forward to, in 5 years, when Teresa Rayford is the mayor, then the idea of cutting the police budget in Portland won't be such an impossible dream. It won't be easy, but at least it won't be an impossible dream that gets just shooed away like that's just a ridiculous leftist idea. That's exactly what we all need, and that just needs to be something that's more widely understood outside of the left.
Yep. So I'm just going to underscore something that Alyssa said, which is that individually we can do very little, but together we can accomplish quite a bit. Even when individuals sort of rise to prominence for one reason or another, usually that is because of the hidden contributions of many, many other people. So what we can do individually is stop thinking about it individually.
If we are putting the money that typically go into police budgets into life-affirming housing, jobs, education, all of the things that we fight for, then yeah, that is going to bring us to a better place. It's not going to solve all of our problems, but at the very least, Care Not Cops is working to be able to put the question of cutting the police budget even on the table, because that's not even an option anywhere. Like, is there an example of somebody being able to go for a police budget, cut it, and be strong and successful in that? That's something that is like seen as like an impossible thing for even us now. So for people on this panel who think even beyond that think, yeah, cutting the budget is good, but it's just the start, and we need to go much further. I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to work on cutting the budget because that seems to be like the new cutting edge.
I would just add, something you could even start doing tomorrow, and I should just know because people from Critical Resistance are here, and this directly comes from them, is, start identifying people in your community that you trust, that you can rely on, and it's seizing back what the police state has really taken from us. I mean, oftentimes the reasons why people call the police is because they're alienated from their community, and so they look to the state to solve a lot of their problems. And that makes a lot of sense. We're tired, we're exhausted, we're overworked. And it can be really difficult to connect to your community. And in Portland, in a heavily gentrified city like this, we're immediately alienated from our communities once we move in. And I would just, articulate this, that you should really go out there and try to find the people that you trust, get connected with your community, and try to create some type of infrastructure within your space, within your community, across people that you trust, where you can help one another, people that you can call when you get into trouble, when someone's suffering from a mental health crisis, or when someone's in emotional distress. figuring out ways, figuring out people that you can call who aren't the police, and taking back those things, right? This kind of goes back to what Alyssa is saying. It's, make it hard for them to justify the cost of policing by saying, well, we don't really need them because we're doing this ourselves. And I'm not saying that everyone has the means to go and do that, but starting to create those communities, finding those people that you can trust would go a long way. So.
We find that in our organization, we've been having our biggest difficulties is with the district attorneys. We lost our family members to police, but we had no accountability for it. And it came directly from the DAs. I have read several grand jury transcripts. They all read the same. It's the same novel. I am the district attorney. They did their job. And that's how they read. And so our biggest fight has been with the district attorney.
There are groups doing really important work like the Justice Collaborative, and there was just a group that put out a set of abolitionist principles for the progressive prosecution movement. And I know one of the groups involved is the Houston Institute at Harvard, of all places. I cannot remember the name of the lead groups, but they produced a really tremendous document.
The Police Union Association of America has officially endorsed President Trump and supports them. In my opinion, that says a lot about policing in general and just where they stand. There's something that's never really brought up that I'd like to talk about. What is police culture? When we talk about police culture, I was involved in the Department of Safety Standards training. We had a contract for 6 months, and so all of the trainers were, of course, white, able-bodied cis men, Blue Lives Matter patches and bumper stickers and rings and hats and all of the merchandise, and it seemed that this is what gets trained into people, that they think it's all right to recognize these kinds of ways of living. And it leads to this frat, locker room talk, rape jokes, misogynist jokes, and dark things that happen just within this training, building this police culture.
I just don't think we can change that culture because it's built into the structural mission. Policing is about the use of violence. They are violence workers, and that comes with a tremendous amount of authoritarian baggage. If you don't want violence and racism, don't get the police involved.
As police become more involved in other institutions and as they become more involved in our communities, that culture also spreads. And we start replicating the logic of policing and thinking more in terms of enforcement, more in terms of more punitive terms. The default answer to social problems, interpersonal problems, sometimes even logistical problems, tends toward a logic of punishment and a logic of violence. And I think that along with all the other harms involved in having the police engaged with things like schools and expanding their area of enforcement, there's also this sort of contaminating influence that we start to internalize their logic.
Abolish the cop in your head.
My grandson was killed February 9, 2017, and I was tossed into this fight because of it. Now, it's more of a statement, and you can say something about it, but I had it on my phone, but I lost it. But it's the oath that the National Fraternal Order of Police take. And it's a horrible oath. And it's basically telling them, stick by each other, have each other's back, right or wrong. And I think that helped build the culture of police. Ta-da.
builds the culture, but it's also a reflection of the culture. You know, changing the oath obviously is not going to change anything. This institution is inherently oriented towards authoritarianism, and I was thinking the only thing I hate more than the American flag is the American flag with the thin blue line at it.
How come it's not mandatory for the police to wear body cams and turn them on?
Body cameras involve a kind of deal, which is that we agree to give up some privacy on the premise that we're going to get some changes in policing. And most activists have embraced this idea. The trade-off is worth it. That if we could just see what the police are doing, if we could get other people to see what police are doing, and if the police officers know we're going to see what they're doing, that this will act as a deterrent and will change policing. Well, that's just not true. And we now have research to show it. I mean, they did a controlled experiment in Washington, D.C., in urban neighborhoods over an extended period of time. They gave some neighborhoods the cameras, other neighborhoods they didn't, matched them up demographically. And there was no effect at all in arrests, use of force, complaints from citizenry, no effect in any variable that they measured. It just did not affect officer behavior in any meaningful way. Now, I will say that some people are not in prison today because of body cameras, because they had exculpatory evidence. And so that's real. But is it worth the trade-off of the use of them for evidence gathering, for surveillance, etc.? But I just ultimately don't think it's going to make any difference whether the cameras are on or not. That's the sad truth. I wish it was some magic, right? Americans love a technocratic solution to their problems. Body cameras has been that technocratic solution, right? With all the revelations of murder and violence by the border police, Obama's big intervention was $15 million for body cameras for the border police. Right? That is a way of diffusing the problem, deflecting, and not addressing it in any meaningful way. And that's usually what these technological solutions do.
A decade and a half ago or so, many police departments around the country, including the one in Portland, started adopting tasers as in large numbers. They had been available before, and some departments had them, but there was a boom in these in the early aughts. And they're very aggressively marketed to police as these sort of control devices, which of course they are, and they're very aggressively marketed to the public as an alternative to lethal force. And again, this speaks to what Alex was saying, that the American public loves a technological solution. And the idea was that rather than shoot and kill people, the police could tase them and then take them into custody. The evidence suggests that places where tasers were implemented, there was a minor decrease in the number of police shootings immediately afterwards. However, there was a overall increase in use of force, and it's because mostly the police didn't use tasers when they would otherwise be shooting people. They used tasers when otherwise they would have been issuing commands, and so tasers became almost entirely used as a compliance tool. So instead of substituting for lethal force, they were usually substituting for no force. I bring this up partly because of the sort of techno-fetishism that Alex was talking about, but also because the single largest manufacturer of body cams in the United States is Taser International. It's the same business model, that they're marketing this to the police as something a tool that will help them with their jobs, that will help with collecting evidence and all that sort of thing, and they're marketing it to the public as something that will help control the police. If the track record's any indication, one of these claims is true and one of these claims is not.
With abolish the police, also going to have to come up with abolish prisons. And currently, with 1 in 3 black men being incarcerated and disproportionately being put in jail. A lot of people who get incarcerated lose their right to vote and thus can't even participate in a lot of things that every other person in the U.S. is supposed to have that right to do. That comes with a big stigma. Oh, you've been to jail, you've been to prison, you're not, well, I don't feel comfortable with you working in my shop, I don't feel comfortable with you around my kids. Like, what are some, I guess, thoughts around being able to successfully welcome people who have been through the criminal justice system back into our communities?
So one of the things that animated me to write the book was a concern that the overwhelming focus of both the scholarship and organizing around the horrors of the criminal justice system were focused almost entirely on prisons. No one is in prison who hasn't first been arrested by the police. And the police produce a tremendous amount of harm to people who never end up incarcerated. The other thing is that it's a very disturbing situation, but reentry services and reentry programs are horribly ineffective. And we've tried a lot of different things, and sometimes small-scale interventions show good results, but then when we try to scale it up, that does not help. We can't do it at a big scale. So we have to quit putting people in these places. And that's not going to be achieved through playing around with parole and sentencing and the kinds of things that most of the criminal justice reform movement is focused on. We've got to also win the ideological battle in the neighborhoods to quit thinking we're going to solve our problems by mobilizing the criminal justice system. We can't just win this through technocratic changes in state houses. And that means we got to talk about policing. So what do we do about the guys who are there now? Well, I think there are a couple of exciting possibilities. One is that the rise of the credible messenger movement that says that one of the resources communities have to stop the cycle of violence is to involve the older generation who lived that life to come and talk about what a dead end it is, literally, to the young people who are caught up in these dynamics from a place of mutual respect and knowledge, not hectoring or criminalization. And the other is, our movements need those voices, and groups like Just Leadership USA has been doing the work of trying to train people and get them involved in our movements and give them a stage and create credibility for the ideas that they have. But just creating another work training program, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. The damage is so severe, and the societal stigmas are so great. So the real solution has to be to quit putting people in these cages. Anybody else?
Reparations, I would say, is one of the first steps, right? It's about restoring what's been lost and transforming the system by giving away power. The problem right now with a lot of these reentry programs is that they're done under a system that's predicated on the same power dynamics that landed people there in the first place. And so when I think about prison abolition and abolishing prisons, I think that we need to pay back what we took from all of the people that we've incarcerated in the United States. And when we talk about things like violence and high levels of violence in impoverished communities, I think we need to really see that is a reaction to the extreme poverty that people experience, right? And in addition to the extreme poverty they experience, it's a reaction that's deeply embedded in the violent character of the structure of our society today, right? I mean, that's exactly how the police operate too, through intimidation tactics. And other communities operate under these same morals and these same norms, right?
People who are getting out and they're having a hard time coming back around, getting their footing. First of all, jobs and education are in short supply under capitalism. So that clearly is one way. But on our side, so many of us, when we're raised, our parents might be really hard on us to tell us not to be the poster child of criminality. So we'll go our whole lives trying to prove that we're not like the criminal other that we believe so badly that we need to like not be like. But that's like the monster in your closet. Like, you know, that's you. So what I feel when I'm hearing you say that is that that's people who so desperately want to disassociate themselves from a criminalized other because then they believe that they will be safe. I think that the best defense to be able to turn that shit around is to precisely identify yourself with people who end up in prison or who don't have a job or don't have a home. Like that is you. Because in the big scheme of things, when the civil war that Donald Trump just called for last week, you know, like when that shit starts to pop off, whether you like it or not, they're going to be on the same side as you. Because like the people who you're trying to play nice for, not you, of course you're liberated, you know, but the people who, you know, we want to demonstrate to everybody I'm not like them. I think that it is the flight from them that like fucks us up in the beginning and catches you at your ankles. I think that the better thing to do is to directly identify yourself with them and see your like future tied up in their liberation.
I think one of the things that is both intellectually and politically interesting about police abolition, and it's both something that makes it very inspiring and also something that makes it very intimidating, is that to really think through the implications of it, you can't just think about police. You also end up thinking about prisons, you also end up thinking about schools, and ultimately you end up thinking about the entire structure of the society. And that introduces a kind of chicken and egg problem where it's like, well, in order to get rid of the police, we need to be able to completely restructure the society so that it's not stratified by race and class. And in order to carry off that notable project, we're going to have to do something about the fucking cops. And it's a little hard to know where to start with that, either in terms of like practical organizing or even theoretically. But I think that the challenge of it only points to the importance of the work.